everyone, and welcome to our webinar today, Developing an Effective Security Awareness Program. Thank you so much for joining us and taking time out of your day to learn more about this super important topic. My name is Eleni Lepo, and I'll be your host today. I'm the Marketing and Event Coordinator here at KiteTech, and usually this time of the year, the team and I are doing a good bit of traveling to attend and present at conferences around the country. Of course, all that is on hold this year, so we've decided to change things up a bit by offering webinars like the one we have planned for you today. Not quite the same as seeing all your lovely faces in person, but I guess it's going to have to do, at least for now. Anyway, we really felt strongly that today's topic is an important one to cover, especially right now, because unfortunately, there are a lot of bad guys and girls out there looking to take advantage of the challenges that COVID-19 has caused. It is more important than ever that we keep security top of mind and are making sure to train our users to be more aware and alert, because there are a lot of threats out there. So for those of you who may not be familiar with Kite Technology, we are a managed IT services provider and consulting firm serving small and mid-sized businesses across the United States. Our goal is to help the organizations we work with maximize productivity, operate more securely, and just experience greater business success. I've highlighted some of the services we provide on this slide. So if you'd like to learn more about how we can help your organization with your technology needs, please do let us know. With us today, we have Jason Goebel, our Chief Solutions Officer, and Dylan Fornero, our Security Engineer. Jason, who is joining us from Phoenix, Arizona, and always likes to rub in the nice weather they have there, is going to introduce himself. Jason, say hello.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jason. I'm the Chief Solutions Officer here at Kite Technology Group. I'm broadcasting live from an undisclosed bunker on the edge of the Sonoran Desert, currently 90 degrees. I've spent about 20 years working for and with insurance agencies. I've written articles for Rough Notes magazine, Primary Agent. I'm also a licensed Arizona agent. My primary role here at Kite Tech is, things like this, talking with business owners about cloud adoption strategies, Microsoft 365, and effective cybersecurity.
Awesome. Thank you, Jason. And thank you for, as always, rubbing it in about how nice the weather is in Arizona. Dylan, why don't you say hello? And Dylan is joining us from Seattle, actually.
Hey, everybody. I'm the security engineer over here at Kite Technology. I've been with the company for a little over 2 years. I've always had a passion for computers and security. And right now, my current focus is company risk assessments, vulnerability scanning and remediation, and compliance management.
Awesome. Thank you, guys. I'm excited to hear from you. So before we get started, let's just take a look at the plan for today. We are going to talk a little bit about why this is happening and who is the target and how are these attacks taking place. Then we're going to talk about what a successful security awareness program looks like. What are the different components and what does it take to have a really good one in place? We're going to talk about how to get started and where to go from here. And then, as I said, we're going to save some time at the end for your questions. So without further ado, Jason, why don't you get us started with why this is happening?
Thanks, Eleni. So all this hacking nonsense, why is it happening? Well, that's a pretty simple answer. Money. Lots and lots of money. If we take a look at just how much money, and kind of put it into perspective, I mean, we're really fighting two global pandemics right now. We got COVID-19 and we got cybercrime. So what I've got here up on the screen is the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. So they keep a record tally of the reported damages related to cybercrime. Now, keep in mind, what's reported is a fraction of the overall. And even at a fraction of it, we're still talking about $3.5 million just this year alone. Or 2019 rather. But the real issue, the real thing to pay attention to is the ramp. You see 05, 06, 07, 08, a little bit of growth, 11, 12, 13, 14, a little bit more. And then over the last few years, that ramp just goes straight vertical. So just a massive exponential growth in cybercrime and the damages that's being caused. And that's because it's pretty cheap to get started. Don't take notes. I don't want you going down that road. But I do want to tell you about what it costs. I'm not going to go over this whole thing in detail, but I do want to point out a couple of key things. On the upper right, you've got your ransomware. $400 will get you 1 million ransom emails delivered to inboxes. If PC malware infections are your thing, hackers charge $1 a PC. If robocalls are your thing, 500 robocalls, $20. The barrier to entry is super, super low. And so the cybersecurity score, if we're keeping score, and we are, here's what it comes down to. Hackers only have to be right one time. So, they win. We can have 100 points, we can have 3,000 points. It only takes one mistake to make yourself a target. So, who is the target? Well, in the news, we hear about the big guys, LinkedIn, Target, ironically, MyFitnessPal, Equifax, and we're big numbers, big headlines. LinkedIn made the headlines in 2012 and 2016, 165 million user accounts. Equifax pretty much hit everybody. MyFitnessPal, 150 million user accounts. But I have two fundamental issues with how the news portrays what's going on. The first issue, they didn't lose their data. They lost your data, your passwords, your information. So many things were tied to that email address. And those passwords are often used elsewhere, so it creates a bit of a ripple effect. Second issue I have is that, with these guys making the big headlines, all they hear about. So there ends up being a misconception that small businesses aren't even really on the radar. And that's not the case. It's very common, very expensive. 46% of small businesses have been targets. 73% have even paid the ransom. And we're seeing the cost of those ransoms go up and up and up. 2 years ago, $4,000 to $7,000 was a pretty good settlement. These days, you get away with under 200,000, you're in good shape, surprisingly. So small businesses, they're prime targets. So why? Well, the bad guys, they certainly don't discriminate. A dollar's a dollar to them. But small businesses are also pretty easy targets. The primary issue, they don't even see themselves as targets. And they lack traditional safeguards. They don't have processes and policies and procedures to safeguard data. They've got a relatively flat security profile in terms of permissions and access. And they've got little to no dedicated budget for cybersecurity. And why we're all here today, there's a lot that's lacking in cybersecurity training in small businesses. 50% of the victims are categorized as small businesses. So this is pretty important. So if it's happening all over the place, why don't we hear about it? It's not newsworthy, not sensational headlines. We're not talking about millions and billions of dollars. Also extremely embarrassing to admit. Nobody wants to publicly admit that the business was out of commission for a day and a half or 2 days because Sally clicked an email, and that generates some horrible PR. You don't want your clients to know, and you got some legal ramifications. If you report it, federal and state regulators may come knocking. They're going to want to know. Clients who weren't even impacted are going to want to know, well, how are you going to prevent next time? So that's why you don't hear about it. It's a pretty uncomfortable scenario to go through. So how does it all happen? Well, usually the attacks hit the weakest link, the employees. We've all got them. And they come through email. One of the main factors we talk about, one of the main threats we talk about, business email compromise. So that means when someone has access to your mailbox and you didn't invite them in and you have no idea they're there, that's email compromise. They're in there, they're sharing your mailbox, they're reading your emails, they're even responding to your emails. Two common financial losses related to this are fraudulent transfers of money, fake invoices, stuff like that, and just culling the mailbox to gather all the personally identifiable information they can get their hands on. There's a lot of good stuff. Applications, invoices, social security numbers, all kinds of good stuff in a mailbox to take advantage of. And it's interesting, when surveyed, IT guys list business email compromise as their number one security concern. Not too long ago, it was ransomware, but as we move workloads to the cloud, ransomware becomes a little bit less of a threat. Still important, but a little bit less of a threat. Now the focus has started to turn into, email and mailboxes, and how do we protect all that? So credential compromise, a little less specific than email compromise, but this is a big one. Credential compromise is what we call it when your usernames and passwords are exposed and somebody has access to them. It tends to come in two flavors. You've got the companies that get hacked, the LinkedIns and Equifaxes of the world. That's what we typically in the news see as a data breach. Not a whole lot you can do about it. Not your fault. And once they're out there. And then there's the stuff that you're tricked into giving away. That's the big one. That's the second flavor. That's what we call phishing. You send messages, send emails, send text messages to a bunch of people, just hoping that you get a response. Send out a message about OneDrive, trying to get people to click on a link. You're gonna find some gold somewhere in that. It's just the power of numbers. 191 average logins per person. 61% are using the same or similar password everywhere. So that's important when we talk about that ripple effect. We're talking about specifically that statistic. Those compromised credentials are used elsewhere, or follow a similar pattern, like summer 2020 exclamation point. That one compromise can result in dozens. 81% of all data breaches all link back to those compromised credentials. So now we have our dear old friend ransomware. By now, pretty much everybody's seen it and everybody knows what it is. We're talking about software that's really designed to hack your data, encrypt it, and hold it hostage. Data gets encrypted, and you have to pay a ransom to get it back. That's a pretty common thing, but the most concerning aspect of the modern ransomware package is that it's becoming what we call extortion-ware. So now it's not just about separating you from your data. They're gonna exfiltrate. They're gonna take a copy of your data off-site, and if you don't pay them, they're just gonna release that data to the wild or sell it on the black market. So you really have a choice: pay up or lose this data. So that kind of raises the stakes when you talk about a ransomware event, because now there's very clear evidence that the data has left the network and that was the intent. So now we've got all the ingredients for a notification of breach. State and federal regulations get involved. Here in the insurance industry, financial sectors, you've got business in New York. You've got a legal obligation to tell them about it and provide them with the details. But the real issue is, can you even trust these guys to be true to their word? They promise to delete the data if you just give them $200,000. So you give them the $200,000. Does the data really go away? Do they not release it? I mean, they're the bad guys, right? So we simply have no way to tell. So does COVID-19 change anything? Well, I can give you 13.4 million examples of where COVID-19 has had a role in cybersecurity. A lot's happened since the start of COVID-19. We all started to work from home. A lot's changed, foundational things. I'm gonna let Dylan explain. Dylan?
Thanks, Jason. So to be able to explain that, we're going to have to take a little step back, and we're going to look at security as a layered approach. All right. Think of it like a Tootsie Pop, right? And your employees are the middle, right? The Tootsie Roll in the middle that you're trying to get to, right? So they have some protections. You have password policies, password managers, MFA, and this is also where security awareness training falls in as well. Then you have the next ring. The next ring is the computers, right? The computers protect the employees, right? They also have some protections. You have antivirus on the computers, you have security patches to patch vulnerabilities, and system hardening. And then you have the outer layer, which protects both the computers and the employees, and that's your network, right? That's where you have, your firewall, your vulnerability scanners, your intrusion detection and prevention systems, right? These are just some of the controls in place, but you understand what I mean, right? So, speaking on that, COVID, of course, has changed many things, like Jason was saying, and that is also where we come across work from home scenarios. You have three common scenarios, and that one, just remoting in using the company network and the company PC, right? It's using common protective services. You have working remotely using a company owned PC, and then you have working from home using your own home PC and your own network. So if we talk a little bit more about the remoting in one, this is going to be the most common scenario. It uses those secure services we spoke about, like VPN, RDP, RDS, VDI. This can be very secure if it's done properly, and that's the biggest point. Is it needs to be done properly, right? You use company-owned equipment, right? So it's all managed by them. Use company network security controls, right? This is going to protect the data flow and is usually set up by professionals in their field, so you know that it's going to be working correctly. And then you have the computer settings, or like the system hardening, like I was talking about, right? So you know that the PC is always going to be up to date, and any security controls that need to be in place are there. And while there's some risk from the local environment, it's still going to be your best method possible when it comes to working from home scenarios. And then we go to the next one, which is a little less secure, and that's going to be working from home using company-owned equipment, specifically the PC. So this is still a pretty common scenario when it comes to working from home. It's usually around a cloud-based application environment, stuff like Epic in the cloud, right? Things that you can get to easily without having to be on your company network. But the things about that is that you leave the company network behind. So you're not protected by that firewall. You're not protected by that content filtering, right? It's because you're outside that range. Okay, so the local environment risk still exists in there. And then we go to the work from home scenario of working remotely using your home PC and your own network. Okay, this is going to be the least common, as it's the least secure. You don't have a firewall, more than likely. You don't have any kind of intrusion detection or prevention systems. You're not doing vulnerability scanning on your network. The PC and other hardware is all purchased and maintained by you, right? So if you're not educated on how to harden the system, right, more than likely default configurations on all those devices is what's going to be in that environment, which opens up a range of attacks that could be targeted to you. So this should be avoided at all costs, but certain scenarios may ask for something like this, and we look at ways to deal with that. So what does this mean, right? The gist of it is that the bad guys are trying to get to you, right? They're trying to get to the end user because you have access to the data. All right, employees are just easier targets. All right, it's not their fault. They're out of their element, right, and distracted by all the current events, right? It's not really something that, well, it is something that we can help change, but it's not something that people are aware of, I would say, right? Your systems are more vulnerable. Entire pieces of the security model are missing, just like I said, the computer, the company-owned computer, the company-owned network, right? And what this tells us is that security awareness is more important than ever. Let's see if we can go over some real-world scenarios just to kind of give you an example of what kind of things can happen. Jason, you want to go through that?
I was just thinking what this webinar needs some horror stories. So I sat down and I pulled 3 true stories from recent memory. First one, CEO fraud. This happens a lot, and it's ridiculously simple. What you see on your screen is the actual email. Hey, Tammy, are you available to send out this wire transfer? Yeah, what's the info? Well, I need you to send $48,600 to the attached account. It's a new vendor we're setting up. Payment's due today. Let me know when it's done. Bam, that was it. $48,000 out the door. Now, this was a large insurance agency, 150 plus employees. And wire transfers were just a part of their day-to-day. Hacker went on the website, found out who the owner of the company is, who the CFO was, who the accounting people are, put the pieces together, spoofed the email address by one letter, copied the email signatures, got all of the stuff off the website, put it together, and because they didn't have a process in place for callback verification, it just went right out the door. No verification, just trust. It was part of the day-to-day, out the door. So CEO fraud is one of the big things that we put into our security awareness programs. Next story, and this is becoming a big one, the compromised mailbox. We're seeing this more and more. It is deceptively simple, and when it's not my money, it's a pretty fascinating process. Here's what happens. So, phishing email lands in an employee's mailbox. They click the link, they put in their username and password, thinking it's a file that they have to open, and then that's when the hacker gains access to the mailbox. But here's the interesting thing. Nothing happens, at least from the employee's perspective. Meanwhile, the hacker is writing mailbox rules that move the mail around so that the hacker can intercept those emails. The emails come into the hacker special folder. If they're not of any interest, drops them back up to the inbox. The employee knows nothing for quite a long time. So 29 days later, in comes an email of a client premium due. Now this was insurance, and this was an insurance agency. Insurance carrier sent a notification to the agent. $114,000 was due. That didn't go to the agent. It went right into that hacker's part of the mailbox. So what the hacker does is sends out an invoice to the client with his own banking and routing information, ACH info. The client was expecting this premium to be due, so the client paid it. $114,000 is what that client paid. Nobody knew anything because The client thought it was fine. The employee never saw the email. So on day 59, the carrier sends the agent a late notice of that unpaid premium. So the employee calls the client, hey, this premium's due. We really got to get this taken care of. And the client says, what are you talking about? We already paid that bill. So 59 days later is when we figured out that they had a hack. Of course, the only thing you can do at that point is file a claim. You can't get that money back. So the third scenario, this is a pretty sophisticated example of what we're seeing with this new supercharged ransomware. On day one, employee clicks on a link. It's a fake email, and that allows the hacker to gain access to the PC. Uses the PC to run a scan on the network, and it finds an old server that didn't have security patches. In this particular case, it was still Windows Server 2003 sitting out there. The hacker used that exposed vulnerability in Server 2003 to jump ship and gain a level of administrator access on the network. And now the hacker's an administrator on the network. The hacker has access to the backup jobs. But he doesn't cancel the backup jobs because that's going to send a notification that backups aren't running. So what the hacker does is they modify the backup job so that it's still running, it's still backing up, but it's not backing up the critical data that the business needs. So that's just day one. Day two, all the way up through day 90, not a whole lot happens. Meanwhile, the hacker's moving critical data to an offsite repository under their control, small amounts of data, which is why it takes so long. You want to stay under the radar of exfiltration systems. You send off too much data, it's going to throw up a red flag in some systems that warns you that you might have an issue. If you send small amounts of data, nobody notices. Not a lot happens in terms of the security systems. So, day 90 comes around. Coincidentally, day 90 happens to be the limit of the retention policy on the backups. So there's no going back from that point, from day 90. The hacker knows this because the hackers had access to the backups this whole time. That's when the ransomware gets deployed. Ransomware starts eating the systems. This is a pretty sophisticated IT department. They managed to stop the ransomware halfway through the servers, and we're talking about 50 plus servers. It's a big deal, but they got it stopped halfway through. So they start going up to their backups because they got successful backups, right? Well, that's when they find the critical data was missing. The historical backups are beyond retention, so the data doesn't even exist. The only option these guys had was to pay that ransom. So these are the types of things we talk about in our security awareness programs. So now we have a pretty good understanding of how things can go wrong. Let's get down to brass tacks. Let's talk about some details. Dylan, what does it take to develop an effective security awareness program?
Thanks, Jason. So there are tons of tools available to help companies create and implement a security awareness program. While some platforms, they're better than others, they really are, but they all have the same agenda, right? They want to teach your employees and make them aware of the threats out there, right? When incorporating this program, most end users will hear and say the same thing, and I hear the pushback all the time, right? I have to do the same thing that I did last year, or it's going to waste my time. Well, there's a right way and a wrong way to implement a training program, and should help prevent this type of feedback if you do it right. Which brings me to my next slide here, and that's going to be relevancy, right? You need to keep the content relevant. Relevancy it's key for keeping users engaged, because users, they just won't care if the training doesn't have to do with their role. I know I wouldn't, right? It should be used to help build best practices into the everyday routines of employees. Because if you don't build a routine in this, it's just going to be learn it and forget it. It's just how it is, right? We have to continuously do what and participate in these training campaigns. Also, it should be specific to the threats targeting your company, right? And while there's some overlap in the general aspect of training, you wouldn't want to train a construction company employee the same as an insurance company employee. And that's another, it brings me to another point, is that you need to make the content fresh and engaging. Don't use out-of-date content. Understand how people learn and tailor your program accordingly. You can do gamification. That's defined as the application of typical elements of a game playing, point scoring competition with others, rules of play, to others areas of activity to encourage engagement with a product or service. Okay, make it fun. Offer bonuses of some sort for passing the test with the highest score, or reward an employee for reporting the most phishing emails with a gift card to their favorite coffee shop, or maybe some extra vacation time. You have to keep it fresh and engaging, or people are just going to get bored. That leads me to the frequency and feedback portion of it. And, from my experience, this part, it's not an easy task. Pushback will happen, but you need to understand that it's okay if it does, because it takes time to implement this successfully. All right. Getting feedback from your employees is important when implementing the training. Okay. Ask the employees, to tell you why they feel the way that they do if they're complaining about doing this training. Okay. Is it too boring, or is it not relevant to them? Right. And act accordingly to that. Tailor your program to that. Okay. And another thing that causes a lot of pushback is the frequency of the training. Okay. Frequency of training is key. With the amount of emerging threats that are out there, it requires training multiple times a year to be effective. Okay. Industry standard is 4 times a year. Most people are doing 1, right? They're going through the training, they're watching the video, they're reading the article, attending a webinar, and then you check their name off the box, right? Done. Well, it doesn't work that way, right? We look at it as twice a year being a happy medium, but it only could be less than 4 if it's done correctly. And if the training is fresh and engaging, you shouldn't have this kind of pushback at all with the frequency of training. So what do we train on? What do you train your employees on? Again, training will depend on your company's needs. Okay, what threats are going to be, targeting our company and our employees, right? But some material is more general and relevant than others. And here's some recommendations to get started. Here we're going to talk about phishing, right? Jason mentioned it before. It's defined as the fraudulent practice of sending emails purporting to be from reputable companies in order to induce individuals to reveal personal information such as passwords and credit card numbers, stuff like that. And according to Statista, 306.4 billion emails sent each day, and 55% of those emails are considered spam. It happens every day. It's all around the world. No one is safe from receiving these types of attacks, right? So who are in the receiving end of those emails? Employees. That's the goal of the hacker, to get to the person who has the credentials, right? Their employees are always going to be your weakest link. They're the ones that have the access to your network and data. So training users to recognize one of the most prevalent attack vectors in this industry will go a long way. Next is email attachments, right? We all have some kind of email attachment that we receive, whether it's an invoice or something, or maybe a picture for documentation, right? We've all received an email attachment at some point. Most of the time, just reading an email isn't going to do any damage, right? Clicking on the attachment, on the other hand, is a little different, because these can contain malicious payloads, right? Malware of all sorts, right? This is how ransomware gets into your system. One of the ways, in the most common way, right? And while some of these attachments can be blocked by some security controls, if you think back to when we were talking from the work from home scenarios, right? Well, sometimes those controls aren't always there. So user knowledge is the only protection they're going to have. So always be skeptical about attachments, especially if you weren't expecting them, right? Let's say Joe sends you an email, right? And it contains an attachment with an invoice for a wire transfer. And you were like, I wasn't expecting this. I never sent that. Well, call Joe to verify. Just because it's coming from his legitimate email doesn't mean that their account hasn't been compromised. Next is going to be something that we all deal with every day, and that's going to be websites and domains. So I'm not going to go into specific detail because that's beyond the scope of this webinar, but I want you to think of a domain as it's a web address or a URL, right? Easy and cheap to register. You can go to GoDaddy or HostGator or any of the other ones and buy one for $5, right? The way that hackers use these to get into your network is that they create their own that looks similar, but maybe it's misspelled. So maybe facebook.com has 2 Ks at the end, and you're just, you looked at the first part of it, but you didn't look at the end, right? Some could be legitimate. It could be an actual company website that had their credentials stolen. This is called domain hijacking. Everyone goes to websites, so it's a good general topic to train on. And real quick, I wanted to talk about abbreviated domains. Some people, I'm sure you've seen them somewhere. They're one of the most common platforms is called Bitly. It basically shrinks down the URL so you don't have www.facebook.com/ and then a whole bunch of crazy stuff after the end of there, right? It shortens it down to a smaller URL. It's used commonly on like social media websites that have like word counts, like Twitter, right? And most people will just click on it without thinking because it doesn't look suspicious, right? It's just a link, right? So hover over it and you'll see that it actually brings up the full URL. And this is a good common practice that should be built into any kind of person's routine, is that if you see that shortened or truncated link, make sure you hover over it or just go to the website directly. And last but not least, and also often overlooked, is physical intrusion. Like I said, this is often forgot about because people don't think that this is a threat to their data necessarily, but it really is, right? It depends on the size and access methods of the company building, but it's easy and effective training, right? Teach employees to utilize the controls in place and have a healthy amount of skepticism for who enters and exits your building. The next portion of a successful and proper program is going to be the testing portion. This is actually a very effective part of the program. And while most people don't enjoy being tested, except Jason earlier told me that he does. So if you guys ever want to send a test to Jason to do for you, I'm sure he'll be happy to do that for you.
What can I say?
So,
tests feel like victory.
Definitely. So, and there's a right and wrong way to implement the testing portion of the program. And we're going to look at some right ways to do it. So let's go on to simulated phishing. These are campaigns created specifically to test users who click on fraudulent emails, okay? It's not meant to be a trick, but it's meant to educate the user on why they failed that test, right? So it could be an email on, your stimulus check. They need more information for you to receive it, or you have an order received and you need to verify the order, right? This is meant to make people aware, and I use that word, lightly, but make them aware of what they are clicking on, okay? Employees should know and expect that they're going to be trained on this, right? Because it does help improve the awareness, right? So, but the thing is you don't want to do it too often because you don't want to take down work efficiency, but you still want to educate them on, exactly the type of threats that are out there and how to spot them. And the next slide is just a little infographic on some results of a phishing test over 6 months. As you can see, this is going to be some of the data that you'll be able to view on certain platforms that provide these types of services. And it shows good information like the percentage of employees prone to clicking, right? The industry and size of the company to see maybe that construction company doesn't have people who utilize email as much as an insurance company. So they may be more prone to clicking on phishing emails, right? And you can delve further and further into this information, but I just wanted to give you a graphic of kind of what the information that personally we look at as professionals to help tailor that program specifically to your needs, right? But that's out of the scope of this webinar. So we'll move on to the next one, which is proficiency testing. Again, this is going to be your standard test, right? Scantrons back in middle and high school, questions and answers. We're all familiar with it, right? The thing about this is it's not always effective for everyone. There are some people that are good test takers, and then there are some people that aren't. And even if you aren't, doesn't mean that you shouldn't utilize this in the program. What it means is that it should just be, it's good for supplemental training, but shouldn't be the full extent of the testing portion of the program. And last but not least, I want to talk again about physical access. Again, physical access is often overlooked, and most people they just don't think about it, right? They don't think people are going to break into my building and steal my data, right? Thing about it is it can be easy and fun to test, okay? So I have a scenario for you. Have someone, and actually before I tell you the scenario, let me just let you know that there could be legal ramifications when it comes to testing this. And that's why it depends if you have a shared space or a private office, but before doing any of this, you want to get written permission from management or the building owners before doing anything of this sort. But I have a quick scenario for you to try out if you get that proper permission. And it actually may be pretty fun and eye-opening as to what can happen. So have someone put on a safety vest, grab a clipboard, and they could use a fake ID badge, but not necessarily need it. Someone with a nice smile and a story, and see where they can get into your building, right? See if your users have them check in if you have a check-in sheet. See if someone notifies management that someone's here to check the meter in the back and you let them in, right? Try it out, and then, like I said, it'll be an eye-opening experience. All right, the last part of a successful security awareness program, and this is going to be the most important part, and that is creating a culture around security. All right, this is the foundation of your program and the one that's mostly forgot about, right? Just like a house, you need that solid foundation. Without it, the program's going to fail. As harsh as it sounds, it's true, right? So how do we create this culture and foundation? That brings me to my next slide. Starts with management. A security awareness program needs some sort of oversight and participation from all the parties involved. Just because you're the CEO doesn't mean you don't get to participate. You play an important role in the creation and implementation of a security awareness program in your company. It's a team effort to create the culture. One bad seed can prevent the success of the entire program, right? So what do? You dedicate an appropriate resource. Appropriate is the key term there, right? Someone who will take it seriously. They need to own the program. They need to see it as their child. And as weird as that sounds, it's true. They need to protect it. They need to just keep it going the way it needs to go, keeping it on the right path, right? And these people, they need some sort of authority, whether or not that's, talking to management, and not to say that they're, getting management on their side to maybe get somebody else on their side that doesn't want to do the program, right? They need some kind of authority to be able to implement that correctly. A good rapport with employees also goes a long way. The person, there's always somebody in the office that necessarily isn't the most social when it comes to, interacting with the employees. But there's also that person that, is happy with everybody, good with everybody, right? That's a good person to, put in this position, right? And they, you can have them set a schedule to follow up with the users, for their training and feedback, because feedback is a huge thing. And if you're not approachable in regard to security awareness, right? Nobody's going to give you the feedback, and nobody's going to tell you why they feel like they shouldn't be doing the program, right? It's an ongoing project. It's not going to go away, right? Encouragement goes a long way. So encourage your employees to, help create that security posture and culture in your company, right? Work together to keep your clients safe. It's a team effort, like I said. It really is, and that culture goes a long way. Jason, did you have any thoughts on that?
It's interesting. As we do these things more and more, not just on topics of cybersecurity, but really on topics of of everything. I see two themes. They keep repeating and repeating, and they're really critical. I think they're important to mention here. Leaders, managers, you have to go first. You have to believe in this stuff. If you're not willing to walk the walk, everybody below you, everybody that works for you and with you is going to see this as a nuisance. So you have to see this as beneficial. You have to brag about it every chance you get. Lead the way, and people will follow. The other important theme that I always see coming up is that concept of appointing somebody and empowering them. We call them evangelists, champions, and it's not always the person you think. You always think, well, that's one of your managers. Not always. Whenever you're deploying something new in your business, in your environment, you're going to find some people that they naturally get it. It's just there. It just makes sense to them. They enjoy it. You need to recognize those people and empower them to be the evangelists. So, when somebody's gonna, poo-poo the idea, like, oh man, he's changing these passwords. Man, it's a pain. Those evangelists are gonna immediately go, you know what? Hey, at least I know I'm not getting hacked today. That's all I care about. Don't you? So it really sets the beat that everybody else marches to. So those are important things. And you got to have those two critical elements to even get started, really. Speaking of getting started, I hope you leave this webinar with two takeaways today. Number one, an effective security awareness program is one of the most critical tools you can have in your cybersecurity toolbox. If I didn't leave you with any other impression, if Dylan didn't leave you with any other impression, please know that. The other takeaway I want, this only works well if it's built for you and your people and your business. A cookie cutter approach won't do it. Pulling it off the shelf, it won't do it. I mean, this has to be yours. It has to reflect your culture. You have to own it. So, coming from the guy who loves tests, I'm going to give you guys all some homework. You guys probably fit into two categories. There are some of you that aren't doing any kind of security awareness training in your environment. Here's what I want you to do. So I need you to pick a champion. Pick that one person who just gets this stuff. And you need to establish a baseline so you know where to go. You're going to do that by running a phishing test. If you don't have the tools, if you don't have the skills, let us help. We will absolutely help. Just get in touch with us. I will give every single one of you a free hour of consultation just to talk about this stuff, just to make sure you get it right when you're starting that journey. I don't care if you're a client. I don't care if you're not a client. It is that important to all the businesses out there. So the other group of you, you've already started. You've probably got some security awareness training going on in your environment. But now it's time for a tune-up, and that's my challenge to you. Review your notes, review your reports, review your engagement. I challenge you to improve that baseline. And again, let us help. Give us a call. We will work with you. I guarantee you we can find something that can improve that baseline, improve the adoption, and improve those reports.
Great, awesome. Well, thank you so much, guys. As far as homework goes, this actually sounds like good stuff.
It's better than most of the homework I did. It's better than math, that's for sure.
Well, and you're offering to help with it, which I think is pretty nice. So, all right, so let's jump into answering some of our questions. We did have a few that came in. Jason, I'll let you take this first one. Any suggestions as to what to do if management refuses to participate in security awareness training?
I want you to find a bat, beat him over the head. Does that work?
Eek, I don't think we should be giving that advice.
Well, I can try. So, I mean, management has to get behind this stuff. Leadership has to get behind this stuff. No exceptions, no excuses. Um, I, you have to solve that problem. Have to.
All right. Next question, we'll send that one to Dylan. How frequently should users ideally receive security awareness training?
Actually, could I talk on that last question as well?
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah, so one way you can do is just bring up your concerns, right? If you're concerned that they're not taking it seriously, right, let them know. Don't be afraid. They have a huge role to play in it, and if they don't understand that, right, that's a problem, and they will eventually when that event happens to their company. And we want to try to get them on the right page before that happens. So I just wanted to say that on that in regard
You
to
know,
that last
Dylan,
question.
that's a very good point. Um, because adoption strategies, they go both ways, right? You know, leadership has to be involved, but that's a top-down approach. You absolutely can have a bottom-up approach to this. You know, the employees can clamor for this. They can. I'm going to give a shout out to one of our employees, Joe Baxter. When he sees something he doesn't like, he's like, you know what, guys, we have to do better. We have to do better. And he doesn't take no for an answer. So that's an excellent point, Dylan. Thank you.
Mhm. And Lenny, could you repeat the next question for me?
Sure. The question was, how frequently should users ideally receive security awareness training?
So with, like I said in before, the industry standard is 4 times a year, right? Each quarter. Um, Industry standard is I use that word lightly because there are some people that find it, difficult to, now I say find the time for that much training where, I mean, that should be a priority in my opinion, but it depends on how well that it's taking off. So if your program is, new and just developing, I think twice a year usually hits the mark. Um, 4 times a year seems like a little too much, but it really is effective with how many emerging threats are out there and how many new threats come up every day. So, really they should be doing it 4 times a year, and it should be different content each time. And that's my opinion.
All right, thank you, Dylan. All right, Jason, I have a question for you. Do
Sure.
phishing tests really test the users? Won't my spam filter just catch the phishing tests?
Without some special modifications, yes. I work with a lot of businesses, and a lot of times, you know, I see that they've got these really great programs built for phishing testing, and they're all getting trapped by their spam filter. So you do have to do some modifications to make sure these are hitting their users' inboxes. Because if they don't make it that far, you're really getting some false positives in terms of what you look like. Your results are going to look really good if no one's even getting the email.
Okay, that makes sense. Dylan, I do have a question for you. I have part-time workers who don't have email. Do they still need training?
Absolutely. Um, Email, like I said, while it is the most common attack vector out there, it's not the only one, right? You have the physical intrusion, right? You have the malware, the different ransomware. Doesn't always just come in through email. So yes, they absolutely need training as well.
Okay, thank you. Jason, I think we just have one question left, and I'm going to let you take that one. How long does it take to start seeing results?
That's an excellent question. Because what we're trying to do here is really prevent bad things from happening. So, how do you know that you're being effective or more effective when nothing happens, right? Like, yeah, how do you run everything off of a negative? Um, so, I mean, you're really going to have to trust the numbers. So, as you go about your phishing tests, you keep an eye on that baseline. But you also keep an eye on what industry and size averages are. And we saw it a bit on that slide, that concept of being fish prone. So, you know, an average sized business in the financial sector has a fish prone 3%. So there's a 3% likelihood that somebody's going to click on something. If you're clocking in at 6 to 9%, you've got a problem. So you got to really get that in line. And I would say that a security awareness program really reaches a level of maturity around the 1 year mark. But you always have to keep an eye on where you are in relation to where you should be and what's best practice. Because we fall victim to the concept of regression to mean, meaning if we're not making forward progress, we're actually getting worse. So it's an ongoing challenge to keep in line with that industry standard. But yeah, one year, I think you will have enough data to go back to really have paint a really solid picture of where you were in relation to phishing attempts, phishing, clicking, getting caught, that types of thing, versus where you are today.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you. I think that is all the questions we have for today. Before we go, I do want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today. We hope that we shared good information and that it was helpful for you as you look for ways to either start or improve upon your company's security awareness program. Just to reiterate, if you're a current Kitech client with questions about your security awareness program, please do reach out to your client experience manager and do a review, talk about it, see what you can do to make it better. If you're not currently working with Kitech and would like to learn more about our services or would like to take advantage of a complimentary consultation or a phishing test, please feel free to reach out to us using any of the ways listed here. Thank you again for spending time with us today, and we hope you all have a fantastic rest of the week. Take care.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you, everybody.